weeks ago. And it's really kind of cool that I'm talking about it now because I just experienced Sabbath over these past few days in a new way that taught me some things, and uh, the timing is kind of perfect. I'm really glad for the way God worked that out. But, over the past few days, we didn't go anywhere. In fact, I don't think I left the house except to go to the auto shop and to Menards for some supply runs. But just got a bunch of stuff done on this vacation that wasn't hadn't done any other time. Organized the garage, organized the shed. Dad came over and helped me put up the swing set on the playhouse for the boys in the backyard. Really thankful for Dad's help. Also really thankful for Dad's steel-toed boots because yesterday I was trying to lift this the beam that holds the swings and the rings, and it's a pretty massive 4x6 post. It's probably about 15 feet long, and I was trying to get it 8 feet up in the air, and I had it up over my head, and it rolled, and it slipped out of my hands, and my heart was beating real fast, and just grazed Dad's toe. It would have smashed the toe probably, but thankfully he's wearing his steel-toed work boots, and he took it in stride. Thank you, Dad, for your mercy and forgiveness, and for your steel-toed boots. I guess he knew working with me, you need to take some precautions. uh, I'm thankful for the help and the projects that we got done. And there was in some way there were full days yesterday. I don't think I sat down. I was just go, busy, but making the space that I live in nicer and more appealing and more useful. And maybe you've had something like that. Maybe you've taken staycations or taken a weekend and worked really hard at maybe re-landscaping your house or pulling weeds out, or maybe you painted something, or you remodeled something, or maybe you organized your garage and could put a car in it for the first time in years, or something like that, where you've put a bunch of energy and effort into making your space nicer. Anybody relate to that? Anybody ever done any, like, nods your heads vigorously if you've done something like that? Yes. Yeah, you can kind of relate to that. And what you experience when you've done something like that, after you've worked really hard, if you're anything like it, you kind of like to sit back and look at it. This is pretty funny. This is it's silly, but after organizing that garage, and it took me a couple of days, I kind of just go stand in it, and I just kind of look around like, this is nice. I'm really happy about this. Or you walk in your shed, or you look at your new paint job, or you look at your garden bed that's all full of rid of the weeds, and you kind of admire what you did, right? And you're thankful for it. And I think that's what God does in this act of creation on the seventh day of creation. It's not that God's tired, right? When it says God rested from his work, he's not like, oh man, that really took it out of me, making the whole universe. It's not like God is exhausted. It's God has, in the beginning, in Genesis 1, we find that God is, the Spirit of God is hovering over the deep, and the earth is formless and void. It's literally what this is talking about. There's no scheme, there's no blueprint, there's no plan. Everything is chaos, everything is disordered, everything is turbulent. And the story of the creation, of the 7 days of creation, is that God imposes his order on the chaos. That God comes to this unformed void, and he gathers things together. He gathers water together, and he separates water from water, and he creates light, and he makes the dry land appear, and then he has plants appear on the land, and fish appear in the water, and birds appear in the sky, and he fills up the empty places with these living creatures, and there's a beauty, and there's a symmetry, and there's an orderliness that God has imposed on this chaos. And on day 6, God creates his masterpiece, humanity, image bearers of the divine, beings made in God's likeness and in God's image, to relate to him in a special way, in a unique way. And he places humans in this ordered, hospitable, beautiful place. And on the seventh day, he finishes his work of creation. I've been listening to some lectures called the Great Courses, and I really like the Great Courses. And this one I'm doing right now is it's called Understanding the Old Testament, and it's the Dr. Robert Miller II is the lecturer on these courses. I recommend the Great Courses anyway. They're university level classes that you can just listen to on all kinds of different topics. You get them at the library. It's great. But Robert Miller is a professor, and he teaches at the Catholic University of America, and he has emphasized that there's actually a 7-day creation. And this goes along nicely with some of you have heard me talk about the Lost World of Genesis 1. It's a book by Dr. John Walton. I went and heard him teach or speak about it down at Bethany Theological Seminary a year or so ago. A couple of you went with me. And Walton and our friends at the Seventh-day Adventist denomination all really emphasize that there's not a 6-day creation, there's a 7-day creation. And that what God creates on this 7th day is the day, is the Sabbath, is this, and the whole point of the other 6 was kind of to get to the 7th. That the whole reason you organize your garage, or you pull out all the weeds of your flower bed, or you repaint the barn, whatever. I don't know if anybody has a barn. Whatever it is that you spend your time and your effort making better, it's so that you can enjoy it. It's so that it's functional. But you know, for anybody who's ever weeded a garden, you know what happens just a couple of days later? The weeds come back, right? Anybody who's ever organized a garage before, you know what happens just a few weeks after you put all that effort in? It's like, oh man, I can't get the car in anymore. If you've ever cleared out the clutter in a room, or you've repainted a house, you know, you gotta keep at it, right? It's like the world wants to tear down the structures. The earth itself is trying to pull my house down. That's why we got to repair the roof every 20 years, put a new roof on every 20 years, right? Or you've got to do stuff to maintain your property or your buildings or your flower bed or your garden, because left to its own devices, nature's just going to keep growing weeds. It's just going to, the sun and the snow and the rain are just going to keep beating on your house or on your projects. And so but the point of work isn't just to keep doing it. The point of weeding a flower bed or organizing a garage or painting a house or going to your job or building a 401k, it's not just to keep doing it over and over again. The point, why do you do all that stuff? It's so you can look at a beautiful flower garden. It's so you can live in an orderly space. It's so that you can enjoy the roof that's over your head and the shelter it provides for your family. You go to your job and you work for your pension or your IRA so that someday you're going to be able to do the ministry you want to do. Sometimes when you're working, you're doing the ministry somebody else wants you to do. And when you retire, you fund your own endeavors. The point of all this work is to enjoy what it is that you're working for. And that is what God is doing, I believe, on this Sabbath day. He rests from the work he's done. He takes a break and he looks. And what Dr. Miller pointed out is that in the other days of creation, God has created 3-dimensionally. He's created things in space. The only thing that's created on day 7 is the day itself. And he says this is an Einsteinian kind of understanding of the universe. God creates in the 4th dimension, in time, this temporal temple that comes on this weekly pattern that you enter into the Sabbath, and then 24 hours later you leave it. But that, and in the Jewish tradition, people would prepare themselves to enter Sabbath. They'd take a bath, they'd put on nice clothes, they'd get ready to enter the Sabbath, and 24 hours later it leaves. But built in to the rhythm of our universe is this time to rest and reflect and enjoy what it is that God has made for us. But too many times we miss that. You know, the Apostle Paul says in the New Testament that some people consider one day more holy than another, and other people consider every day the same. And that in the New Testament, in the new covenant that we have in Jesus, it's not just one day, the seventh day, Saturday, that we have to set aside to worship God. That in the new covenant, we recognize, most Christians anyway, recognize Sunday, the day that Jesus rose from the dead, ushering in and sealing this new covenant as the day we gather to worship. But Paul and other places in the New Testament says it doesn't really matter which day it is. But what does matter is the practice. What does matter is the point that God has created the Sabbath for us and the principle of Sabbath for us. The writer of Hebrews says that there yet remains a promised Sabbath rest for God's people to enter into, that the goal of creation, in a sense, is rest. Part of the genesis of this sermon idea came from an article that Matt sent to me. Matt's always sending me articles, which I appreciate. Thank you, Matt. It's really good to have smart friends that send you stuff to read. It saves you a lot of time. There's this quote from Norman Wirsba, and he says that Sabbath is not an optional reprieve in the midst of an otherwise frantic or obsessive life. It is the goal of all existence. I'll say it again. Sabbath is not an optional reprieve in the midst of an otherwise frantic or obsessive life. It is the goal of all existence. And this article was that Matt sent, that this quote was lifted from, is talking about the quarantine and the kind of the mandated lockdown that so many of us have been in for months, and it's now kind of easing up, and talking about how in these last 3 months, a lot of us have been forced to rest, forced at least to stop, and how that's been a difficult challenge for some of us, but that we could redeem it if we thought about it in terms of Sabbath. If we thought about, what is the point of all the striving that we do? What is the point of what it is that God has created? And Sabbath is there. The idea of Sabbath, the principle of Sabbath, is there for us to, on purpose, on a regular basis, hopefully a weekly basis, if not more often, stop and enjoy God and the good things that he has given to us. This point, this principle of Sabbath, has eluded humans, though, from pretty much the beginning. In the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 25, there is this account that has been recorded for us of one of many confrontations that Jesus has with religious leaders of his day regarding the Sabbath. This is what it says. This is Matthew 11:25. At that time, Jesus declared, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." He went on from there and entered their synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" So that they might accuse him. He said to them, "Which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And the man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him. Talk about running face first into the point and still completely missing it. That's what the Pharisees did here. That Jesus, this passage of scripture starts with Jesus making this declaration. He's praising God for the fact that God has hidden things from the super sophisticated people, right? All these Pharisees and the Sadducees, the experts in the law, the people who are supposed to get it, they don't. But the little children, the people who are just humbly following Jesus, they do understand it. And it's to them Jesus addresses this. He says, you guys, anybody who is working hard and you're beat down and you're burdened, come to me. And I'm going to give you rest. I'm going to give you rest for your souls. Sounds good, doesn't it? I'm going to give you rest for your souls. That is a Jesus promise. Jesus promises that if you take on his yoke and you take on his burden, you will have deep soul rest. That's this peace that passes all understanding. That's this joy of the Lord. This is the full and abundant life consists of possessing this soul rest, this access to the life that Jesus gives us. And now notice the yoke is something that goes on the back or the shoulders of a couple of oxen, makes them pull together. And so Jesus says, you got to take my yoke on you. It is a yoke. There's still a burden. There's still stuff you have to do. There's still work you need to do. There's still a load you need to carry, but it's a light one. It's an easy burden. Doesn't mean you're always happy about it, right? Doesn't mean like every job, every task has parts you like, parts you don't like. And so Jesus isn't promising, hey, take my yoke and you're just living on the beach your whole life long. That isn't what he's saying. But he is saying, if you take my yoke, if you carry my burden, if you do what I'm calling you to do, then you're going to have the strength you need to get it done. And not only the strength you need to get it done, you're going to have soul rest. You're going to be at peace, even in the hard times. This is what Jesus promises. And this is a glimpse, I think, into this perpetual Sabbath cycle that God has initiated, that we're meant to be at rest. We're meant to be at peace. Jesus said, I'm going to give you peace. I'm going to give you peace that the world doesn't understand. I'm going to give you peace that the world that can't even, they don't understand it and they can't take it away from you. My peace I give you, it's different from the world's peace. And my yoke and my burden, they're different from the yokes that other people are going to put on you. They're different from the burdens that other people are going to put on you. And so I was going to want to say as an aside, some of you have heard me say this before, that if you are feeling beat down by life, if you are feeling like your burden is so heavy and your yoke is too hard, you've picked up somebody else's yoke and you're carrying somebody else's burden. That isn't what Jesus put on you. Put that down. Put that yoke down. Put that burden down. Take on the yoke that Jesus gives. If you want some help with that, reach out to me. Talk with me about that. I'd love to pray with you about that. Talk, strategize with you about how you can do that. Because Jesus' yoke is easy and his burden is light, and he wants you to have the soul rest that comes from being in right relationship with him and doing what he calls you to do. And then, right after that, Matthew tells the story about this Sabbath walk and little picnic that Jesus has with his disciples. They're just walking along. Disciples are hungry. They pick some kernels of wheat and they just shuck them in their hands. That's all they do. They pick the wheat, they shuck them like this, they eat out the kernels, and that's it. It's not a huge caloric expenditure involved here. And the Pharisees get upset. They're like, they can't do that. That's wrong. It's the Sabbath. And apparently these guys are so worried about keeping Sabbath that what they do is they look around for people who aren't following the rules that they made up to try to bust them. And instead of enjoying God themselves. And so in response to that, Jesus says, there's this crazy story in Samuel where David, he's not even king yet, and he's on the run, and he and his companions, they're hungry, and they show up, and there's no food except for the showbread, and they're not supposed to eat it, but they're hungry, and then dire need trumps protocol. And so here you go, have this bread. And Jesus seems to approve of that. And then he says, and even your own priests, they're breaking the Sabbath, they're working on the Sabbath, and they're okay. And then, even after that discussion, these Pharisees, apparently, they follow Jesus into the synagogue, and they ask him. They point out this poor guy who's in the synagogue with a withered hand, right? And the Pharisees call Jesus' attention to him. And they're looking for a reason to accuse him. They're like, look at this guy. See his withered hand, Jesus? Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? You're going to break that rule too? And Jesus asked them the question, you guys, if you had a sheep that fell in a pit on Saturday, you'd get him out, right? Here's this man, this human being made in God's image. Of course I'm going to heal him. It's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. In Mark's version of this account of the wheat shucking incident, Mark quotes Jesus as saying that the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. Sabbath is a gift that God has given to us. And look at what happens. Jesus says to the man that the Pharisees called his attention to, stretch out your hand. And the man does it. He's got a withered up hand, and he stretches it out, and right in front of their eyes, the bone grows, and if you got a withered hand and it's a fully restored hand, they saw physical changes in somebody's body. An honest to God miracle happened right in front of their faces on the Sabbath day. And instead of saying, praise God, look what just happened. God's spirit and power are here to bring salvation and healing and wholeness. Thank God, the one we've been reading about and preaching about and studying about and praying to. He's right here in our midst, and look at what he's done. They didn't do any of that. They saw an honest to God miracle, and because it happened on Saturday, they go out and plan to kill Jesus. What Sabbath or what rest, what relaxation, what enjoyment is there in any of that? They completely missed the point of the Sabbath. And so some people, apparently not the wise and learned, some people went away from that encounter praising God, taking on this easy yoke and this light burden, and enjoying the good things that God has done, had given, and was currently doing amongst them. And other people, because it didn't happen in the way they thought should happen, they're muttering about, there are 6 other days Jesus could have healed that guy. Didn't have to happen today. Know any church people like that? Instead of entering into God's good gifts, they reacted negatively, not just negatively, violently. The church has had that since the beginning. Jesus did everything perfectly and still had his detractors, still had the naysayers, still had the negative people, still had people who were so bent on their own theology, on their own rightness, on their own ideas of what was holy, that they went out and killed him. But Jesus is trying to teach us how to receive God's gifts, how to enjoy the creation that God has made for us, and how to have that full and abundant life, how to have that deep soul rest. And practicing Sabbath is part of it. It's a key to it. Stopping, resting, enjoying what it is that you have been given. This is how we cultivate an attitude of gratitude that we've talked about several times, that our attitude determines a whole lot of how we experience life. And stopping, pausing, relaxing, enjoying God and the goodness of his gifts is how you can take steps to develop that attitude of gratitude in yourself. If you're just rush, busy, go, do, you also are going to run face first into the point and still miss it. you're going to miss. It is true that God has created us to work, that God has created us to produce, that God is a creative God. God is a creator, and we are made in God's likeness, made like God. We also create and produce. But that isn't what gives us value, what we produce or what we create. What gives us value is that we have been made in the image of God, that we have been made like God, and that God loves us because of that. Is it. That is the reason human life is valuable. You are not valuable because of what you do or what you contribute or what you produce. This is why many churches, including the Church of the Brethren, our denomination, have taught consistently. Hopefully more churches will get on board with this, but we teach consistently that it is because human life is valuable simply because we're made in God's image, simply because we're made to be image bearers of God, that it is sinful to kill other humans. And so the Church of the Brethren says all war is sin, capital punishment is sin, abortion is sin, euthanasia is sin, suicide is sin. All those things that steal life, that destroy life, human life, are against God's design. And that comes with some challenges, because sometimes it can be tempting to think, so you hear about somebody doing some awful crime and you think, well, sure seems like the planet would be better off without that guy. Or somebody's in a really difficult circumstance and you think, well, sure seems like an abortion would make things a whole lot easier. Or somebody's got a real bad diagnosis. You think, well, that person can't really produce anything anymore. They can't contribute anything anymore. Maybe it'd be better if they were just dead. There are times where having this position, having this conviction that all life is sacred and that all life has value, no matter whether you can produce or contribute or what you've done, that you've got the spark of the divine just because you're made in God's image and likeness. That's a challenging faith tenet to hold. But if we understand Sabbath more deeply, maybe we start to understand it, that resting in God and enjoying what it is that God has made, and not always having to produce, not always having to contribute, but to just be able to sit and to be and to relax and to rest and enjoy is a key part of living the life that God has created in each one of us. A challenge for us as we go forward this week, if you want to take a little homework and put this sermon into practice, is this next week, take a day or a chunk of a day and on purpose, enjoy something you have without working on it or finding fault with it. Sit in your backyard and enjoy the flowers or enjoy the trees or enjoy the breeze. Don't look at the weeds, they'll be there tomorrow. Don't think about all the different things that need to be fixed. That's all going to be there tomorrow. Just enjoy it as it is, as you've made it to be right now. Or, sit on your porch and do that. Go out on your boat, take a walk or a bike ride in the woods or at a state park. Go bird watching. Do something where the sole purpose of it is to enjoy what God has made without feeling the need to fix it or change it or work on it. Just enjoy what is. And start to try to cultivate that in your life on a weekly basis. That is your mission, should you choose to accept it. Would you pray with me? And then we will go into our table discussions. And in our table discussions, you can talk about what it is you're going to do this week to practice Sabbath time. Jesus, thanks for your good gifts to us. Thank you, Lord God, that you have created a hospitable, habitable world. That in the beginning you created light and all the other things. And you created the Sabbath for us to rest in and enjoy you and your gifts. Pray, Jesus, that you would help us to make sure that it's your yoke we're wearing, your burden we are carrying, and drop any others. God, help us to do what you call us to do. Help us to work where you point us to work, so that if we're doing that, then whether we're scrubbing toilets or we're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, we will be living in that soul rest. if we're doing what you've called us to do. Lord, I pray that you would help us to be people of Sabbath, people who are able to be thankful and grateful for what we have, to enjoy you and this time you've given us, knowing that there is a time for work and a time for harvest and a time for Sabbath. And help us make sure that we don't neglect this rest that you've called us to. God, I believe and have experienced that as we enter into the rest, as we enter into a more full enjoyment of your gifts and of your presence, we're going to be more effective ambassadors for your kingdom, and more people will want to join your kingdom, and God will be able to help more people come to know you. I pray that you do all this through us, your people, in your name, Jesus, and for your kingdom's sake. Amen.